Well, hi, friends. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Today, the theme is creating a college essay plan for rising juniors and seniors. And this is kind of like I'm sharing with you some of some Lego pieces, and I'm going to help you assemble them somewhat, and I'm going to share with you sort of for the DIY crowd. There's a poll here that asks, who are you? Who's visiting? So it looks like 60% of you are private and public school counselors. We've got 70% CBO folks and about 25% IECs. Well, welcome all. And then it looks like 44% of you identify as DIY when it comes to essay workshops, and that you're here for the resources. Great. A third of you are interested in potentially partnering, knowing what that might look like. I'll share more on that. And then 10% of you are here just for the vibes. Great. Awesome. Well, by way of like, actually, let me just share my screen because I'm gonna just get into the resources. I like to try to get into a resource as within the first 3 minutes. Oh, I will. Let me add the check-in question. The check-in question today is, what's a quote that you're finding or that you found lately inspiring? I'll share mine. I'll just put this in my in the chat here so you can kind of see what's lighting me up. Um, this is from Rabindranath Tagore, who said, "The one who plants trees, knowing that he will never sit in their shade, has at least started to understand the meaning of life." I love this one. This is from Sal Khan's book on how AI is going to reinvent education and why he thinks that's a good thing. So it's a pretty interesting read. I recommend it. Okay, let's get into the resources. Let's do this. Here it is, how to create your college essay plan for juniors and seniors. Now, the next slide is a favorite for me as an icebreaker if I'm doing workshops with students, or even if I'm like meeting with my team. If you're working in a school setting and you've got a team that you'd like to just do sort of like a little quick connection one with, you basically just take a look at the screen. What's an emotion that you're feeling right now? Where are you living? In fact, if you want to just share in the chat, I'm not going to ask follow-up questions, don't worry. But where are you living right now? You don't have to even give any explanation. I'm feeling I'm feeling energized. I don't know if I've had a pretty good day, pretty like pleased, I suppose, a pretty productive day. And then if you were meeting in a room with a group of folks, you could have students just turn to one another and, all right, just share for a minute or two where you're at, why you're at where you're at. Um, so, okay. Most of you have met me before, so I won't belabor this slide, but if you've never met me before, here are some things that I suppose qualify me for speaking to you today. And I've got some of my identities here. I'm going to get back to identities. I'm kind of planting a seed because I've got some new stuff to say on identities. Some of you have heard me talk about it already, but I'm going to hopefully light up some new uses for this identities exercise that I've been such a big fan of lately. So today we're going to talk about two versions of how to work with students. There's the DIY version, which is what we're going to spend most of our time on. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes talking to you about some great brainstorming exercises that you can use with students. I'm going to get into, like, I'll share with you a list of common topics. We'll talk about mental health challenges, how to guide students on that. I'll give you 3 tips that I think you can pretty much copy paste and share with them. And then I'm going to share with you a couple different tools for helping students. One for helping them select an idea, and then a second one for helping them clarify their idea. So how do they know what they're even writing about? I'll share 4 different questions that you can ask when a student brings a first draft to you. How do you know what to say to them? It's a simple framework. And then I'll share with you the timeline that I prefer when working with students on essays. And I'll walk briefly through some different formats for workshops. Then, for those of you who are like, I'm interested in partnering with College Essay Guy, what does that look like? And could we even do it at a low cost? And the answer is yes. I'll talk to you about CEG Live. So I'll probably spend about 7 or 8 minutes talking to you about what that program is, how it works, how to get registered. And then we'll do a little CEG Live giveaway. So one of you must be present to win. I'm going to ask a quiz question, and it'll be a quiz on something that I end up covering. So pay close attention. I feel like a teacher right now. But then whoever answers that first in the chat, presuming you work in a school or a CBO at a CBO, you'll get a free access for your students. If you work at a CBO, you're already going to get free access because it's free to CBOs. If you work in a Title I school or you have a budget of less than 2,000, you're already going to get it for free. If you sign up, but we'll do that in a little bit. Okay, here we go. Let's do this. So brainstorming. So these are the exercises that I'm using this year right away with my students. I'm going to take a sip of my tea here. Just slow down a little bit. Okay. So the exercises that I'm vibing with, as the kids say, are these. And I'll share this link in the chat. This is the student workbook that's inside my Choose Your Own Adventure tool, which is what I use to run these large events of 3 days or even 4 week processes. But let me just throw this into the chat. So this is the doc that I use. I have students make a copy of it. And lo and behold, the values exercise is at the top. You might have been like, wait, Ethan, I thought you're doing this new roles and identities exercise. But I'm like, y'all, I'm not giving up on the values exercise. It's so good. It's so good for so many things. So we start off with that. And if I'm running, just a 1 day uh, uh, brainstorming workshop, let's say that I've got an hour with students, then I'm mostly going to focus on the things that I'm about to share with you. I'm going to focus on brainstorming. And it starts off with the values exercise. It's a lovely icebreaker. It takes 3 to 5 minutes. A student can, in just a few minutes, identify some things that they're into. You go from 10 down to 5, down to 3, and then have them turn to a partner. What are your top 3 values and why? And it's a great way to get them talking. But then it's like, all right, the real work begins. So this is a 20 to 25 minute set of exercises. Some of you will be familiar with this from years past, but I've changed two of them. And it starts with an exercise called I Love or I Know. And in this, you'll see a little link here to a video of me doing the exercise. And in the I Love, I Know exercise, you just ask them to come up with a list of things that they love or know a lot about. Takes 2 or 3 minutes. And then essence objects, my go-to from since 2016, maybe since 2007, maybe I've been using this one, but it asks students to pick 10 objects that represent, moments, memories from their lives. These are some questions they can answer. I don't any longer ask students to spend 15 minutes on this. Now I'm spending just 3 or 4 minutes. They can always come back to it if they want to spend longer. And then we've got a list of random questions that can lead to some interesting things. My favorite one is this one because I think it can lead to actual essay content. What's your actual superpower? After that, career. What's a career or even a couple careers you're interested in? And then pick 4 to 7 qualities, hint, hint, values for those. And then we get into this. Okay, so I'm using the term identities in 2 different ways today. One is identities as it comes, as you're looking at it right now. So cultural, social identities, things like race, heritage, culture, national origin, first language. It might relate to sex and gender expression. So this is, identities in this sense. There's another sense of identities that I'll reference in just a little bit. But I like to ask students to spend just a few minutes, and I encourage them to, I say, hey, this is for you. You don't have to share this with anybody else. And then exercise 6, ask them, where do you feel at home? Where do you feel most like yourself? And it could be a geographical place. It could be a space in their home, in their actual place where they live, or it could be sort of a place in their minds, like when I'm thinking about history, or when I'm thinking about coding, or when I'm actually coding in my room. And then finally, I used to have something called the Islands of Personality exercise. I've since gotten rid of that and replaced it with this roles and identities exercise, which if you've been on any webinars or even listened to the podcast at all within the last year or so, I've been talking about this one. So this is a simple exercise that essentially you can think of all of this other work before it as kind of priming them for this question. What are 5 different roles and identities that you might like to express in your college application? And I'm encouraging students to do it based on the stuff that they've done so far. So you've been writing about coding and, building these different, systems. Well, it could be that a student goes, ooh, yeah, I kind of am like an architect, and I'm an architect in other ways too. Or maybe the student's a real, change maker, and that's true for them in lots of different ways. Or maybe they're, I don't know, a philosopher. So asking students to scope out what are some different roles and identities to figure out which ones kind of maybe overlap, and then to see if they can identify, let's say at least, 3 to 5, and then name some different places where these roles manifest in their life. So I'm a critical thinker. Well, where does that manifest itself? Well, I like to think critically in class projects, on the debate team, with my teachers and parents, even staying up late talking philosophy with friends. And they just delete these and then write these in for themselves. And again, I've found that this exercise has worked just a little better if they've written a bunch of stuff down and they've started to, in some cases, recognize patterns and see how they are these things. But then part two is this is like the potential here is to scope out some different roles and identities that they could put in there across their application and to even create what I call an application log line. So what do I mean by this? Well, Sarah Lawrence has a really cool prompt, an essay prompt that says Sarah Lawrence students are often described as hyphenates, filmmaker, sociologist, historian, environmentalist, photographer, etc. Tell us about seemingly disparate interests you've brought together. So and students can kind of ignore the Sarah Lawrence part of it. But I really agree with this, and I love this view of students. And so I tell them, I say, imagine this is true for you. How do you identify? Create a hyphenate sentence for yourself. I'm a catalyst, innovator, interest hopper. Or I'm a historian, a conservationist, and a teacher. Maybe they don't go together. Or maybe you put them together and you add your major. I'm a catalyst, innovator, interest hopper, interested in pursuing social entrepreneurship. I mean, I want to know about all these different identities and how they manifest. So, this is from an actual student's essay from a few years ago. I'm a cultural philosopher interested in starting a reformation within Neo-Confucianism through literature and music. And he used that for a few different schools that he was applying to. So the invitation here is to encourage students to think about these different roles and identities in their life and maybe even go, hey, I don't know exactly how it's going to manifest, but here's a rough draft of my application log line. Again, a log line just being a one sentence description of the stuff that you want to communicate in your application. It's important to note this need not be final. It's just a first draft. The student can come back and update it. But for you, the counselor, if you were to imagine in a workshop, a student were to spend 35 minutes and they would have something like this, like I want to just propose that as like a cool potential here. Like if you had even like a third of your students be able to say something like, I'm a catalyst, innovator, interest hopper, interested in pursuing social entrepreneurship, like, wouldn't that be cool? And wouldn't it be nice to know that? I mean, this is something that students can then put at the top of their whatever application docs they're sharing with you. Or, I mean, wouldn't it be nice to have that information when you're writing their recommendation letters, for instance, and you can sort of help support this case that they're making. So as you can see, I'm a super fan of this exercise. And the first use that I want to name for it is kind of like a bringing them all together. I'm not going to call it one exercise to rule them all, but it does sort of have a sort of cinching quality. And I'm doing this with my hands. So let me stop sharing my screen. It kind of goes, and it's sort of like, oh, this is how this stuff kind of comes together. And so that's the first use of the roles and identities exercise that I'll talk about today. But there are other exercises. In fact, you can actually help use this to help students find new personal statement ideas. So let's see, how deep do I want to get into this? I'll get deeper into this in just a second, but one simple way to do this, let me just use one of the examples that I've been using already. Let's say, for instance, a student decides, I am a catalyst, innovator, and interest hopper, and I'm interested in pursuing social entrepreneurship. Let's say they started there. Well, how could this lead to potential essay ideas? Well, there's a really simple one where the student writes a paragraph about how they are a catalyst in lots of different ways. And the next paragraph is how they're also an innovator. And the third one is they're also an interest hopper. And then finally, they say, here's how all of this will help me pursue social entrepreneurship. Now, I know that sounds kind of straightforward and kind of basic, but again, if I could get a student to just write a few paragraphs on that, and I could imagine some students would, that's a pretty cool possibility. But it's not the only way to do it. So let me show you, I'm going to jump inside. This is the tool, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, because this is part of CEG Live. But when it comes to helping students think about their topics, I kind of had like a glimpsing the matrix moment, I'm going to call it, where I started to see that this roles and identities exercise was more visible than I knew. So for instance, there was this student who wrote this My Desk essay. Some of you have read this or heard this essay in the past. And the student starts the essay talking about the objects on his desk. And in the essay, he talks about his laptop and he talks about some books. And then later he talks about a bracelet. Now, this is what I would call an essence objects exercise or a stuff in my room essay. But one of the things he does that's really cool is he talks about how his laptop has led him into a life of curiosity. And even though he's probably going to call himself an engineer someday, he says, my heart's in so many different places. I'm a philosopher, a historian, an economist, a black belt in Taekwondo, etc. So here, laptop equals curiosity, and that's opened up lots of different sides of himself, roles, identities. And then he brings it home saying, with each Google search, a new world opens. So this is a simple example of how, even though the student didn't actually do the roles and identities exercise, because I hadn't invented it at this point, he's weaving in these roles and identities in ways that allow us to kind of pop up and see these different parts of who he is. So that's one example. Let me just go back. Another example of this, and this is beyond just the essence objects one, is a student, for instance, that was writing about, let's see, let me go into the uncommon extracurricular activity essay. So here's a student who was writing about hiking. And he's writing about hiking and Boy Scouting, and we're kind of like, okay, cool. We sort of see that he's, you know, been a part of Cub Scouts. And then he starts to talk about historical trail hikes that he's led other campers on. And we're like, whoa. And then that hiking has also given him an opportunity to teach younger scouts. Okay. And then he's like, you know what? I've also had a chance to learn about an AP bio about harmful effects of, harmful, what things that really hurt the environment. And so at the end of his essay, he says, when I'm hiking, I'm not merely a hiker, I'm a historian, a conservationist, and a teacher all in one. So there's this again, like sort of a cinching together moment. Now, these are examples where the roles and identities are being explicitly named. Now, I don't hold that students have to explicitly name roles and identities in every single darn essay. But what you'll notice, and I would challenge you to check this out, as you go through students' essays from, look at and take an essay that you love from a year or years past, and look and see if you can spot different roles and identities that the student is implying, even if they don't explicitly name it. Anyway, so those are some examples of how I think the roles and identities exercise can bring depth to a common topic, because writing about Cub Scouts is like, oh, come on, another Cub Scouts essay, right? But hearing about how Cub Scouts think about who's brought in this. You're a teacher, a conservationist, a historian. Suddenly I'm like, okay, this is not just quote unquote a Cub Scouts essay. It's about so much more than that. So that's how this can be used to broaden a student's sense of what's possible with a particular topic. Okay. The third thing, and I mentioned this briefly, is creating an application strategy. So what are the different parts of you that you want to map out? By the time they get to the end of your application, what do you want them to be able to know or to be able to even say about you? So like, wow, I see this student is an engager, they are an artist, and they are a bookworm, and that would be something that I could go into committee with to if I'm an admission reader. Finally, and I'm not going to get into this today because we're going to focus on the personal statement. This is just so much supplemental essay idea material, because when you're trying to help a student figure out for that why us essay, well, I don't know what parts of myself. I don't know what I like about a school. Well, I noticed on your exercises here, you said you're a catalyst. Well, what do you hope to start on campus? What kinds of things do you hope to catalyze? Or you're a question asker. Well, in what particular classes are you going to ask questions, and what kinds of questions are you going to ask? So they can start to activate and think about bringing more of themselves to this essay and, of course, to these college campuses. It's also a really good one because so many campuses now are asking, what are the sides of yourself that you want to bring diversity to our campus? Here's a great way in. So you can see I'm super excited about this. This is let's see, how many different uses? I've got 13 uses. So I've shared with you 4 of 13. And this exercise here is one that I'll put in the chat as well. The chat, that's how they say it in French, is that right? Okay. So there's that. All right. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Okay. If I'm just doing a workshop for an hour with students, I'm just going to focus on brainstorming. Even if I've got an hour and a half, I'm just going to focus on brainstorming. And I'll share more about that towards the end, like what is the actual format. But after you've done brainstorming with students and you've sent them away to start, fleshing out some ideas, which I'll talk about in just a minute, I think it's good to do what I call like a topic check moment. And you can do topic checks in a group setting, or you can do them in the one-on-one setting. And a topic check is just the moment before they go off for the summer and start to write about golf. You go, wait, can I hear what you're thinking about in terms of golf? Because what we're looking for in these sessions is we're looking for student topics that are elastic, so stretchy enough to talk about lots of different sides themselves, and then hopefully uncommon in some particular way so that the student will be more likely to stand out. Because if they spend hours and hours and hours working on the best darn golf essay they can write, if they're focusing on common qualities, common values, then it's just going to be another golf essay. And so, how do we help them do that? First of all, this is sort of like a little framework that I offer for this is like the more uncommon and elastic the idea is, the more likely it is to stand out and the more likely it is to show a big, more sides of you. The way that I think of this, there's a great book. I need to bring up this visual like a chart and share it. But there's a book on writing and it's called Stealing Fire from the Gods. It's a book on screenwriting and it shows a big pie chart. And it's like if you could chart every movie on this pie chart and imagine how much of like if you imagine the whole thing is like all known truths that some movies share this much of like what's true about human experience and some are like this much. So if you think about the potential of like a student, all their complexity and in infinity in just sort of like a circle, some essay topics are going to reveal like this much about them, and some essay topics are going to reveal like this much about them. So we're trying to find something that's elastic enough so that it's going to share a little bit more about who they are. And there are a few different ways to do that. So for students who are writing about challenges, I find those, by the way, tend to stand out more when students aren't writing about things like the bad grade they got or the interaction they had with a particular teacher, but challenges that are in some cases more difficult and more compelling. I'm not suggesting, it kind of looks like I'm suggesting students should write about difficult challenges. I'm just pointing out here that more difficult challenges I think tend to help students stand out a little bit more. And I think I need to edit this though, because this sort of like great topic, difficult challenges. They're going to be like, oh, so I need to maybe edit this. So I won't be sharing this with students in the near future, but I think you know what I mean, where it's sort of like if the challenge is more compelling, has had a big impact on their lives, and they can say something insightful about it, that's going to be more likely to stand out. Common topics list time. Here you go. Pausing, sipping tea. I tell students, I'm not saying you can't write about these things. I just think that if you choose to write about these things as your main topic, it's maybe going to blend in more. But if you can take something like Boy Scouts and connect it to different roles and identities, okay, maybe we've got something there. But I think I like to put these on the board for students to be like, oh, that's what I was thinking about writing about. And it's like, okay, well, let's just get a little deeper with it. Let's talk about mental health challenges for a few minutes. The thing that I think students don't know is that they have another option where they can put mental health challenges, and it's the additional info section. Now, granted, yes, the additional info section, if in case you didn't see, it did get trimmed this year. So this is the section of the Common App that in the past has been 650 words. It's now cut down to 325. By the way, the Common App has done this before, where they remember that year they took the personal statement and they went from like no limit. It used to be no limit, and then it became 500 words, and people were like, "We need more space," and they were like, "Okay, 650." So I could potentially see the additional info section coming back to 650 because I've seen enough counselors being like, "We need more space. Students need more space." But for now, it's 325. But still, I think if a student has faced mental health challenges and they want to describe briefly what the challenge was, what they did about it, and what they learned, I think that could go in the additional info section, and then they can write about whatever else they want in the personal statement. I also wonder what can be put in the counselor letter. This is where I think counselors can really advocate for students. If the student explains to them, either in writing or verbally, here's what happened, I think the counselor can be a great advocate. And if a student insists and they're like, no, this is my story, okay, so let's make sure a third of it is challenges and effects, a third of it is what the student did, and about a third for what they learned. And these two sections here are the parts to really thicken, I think. But I've got so much more to say about this. And in case you missed it, last year I put together a complete guide, and I'll link this in the chat. And it's got a whole bunch of advice. I wrote this in collaboration with Chris Liu, who I recorded a podcast with, and a couple other awesome folks, Sandy and Melissa, shout out. But you'll see the main takeaways from this article are the ones that I shared with you just now. But here I've got a little video that goes with it. I've got some good advice from college admission officers. and then some specific examples. So if you're looking for like what should students actually put here in the additional info or education section, first of all, I show them, okay, here's what it actually looks like, what the section looks like, and then you'll see some examples with some analysis of what's working well. So that's all in there. And then after that, you'll see some example counselor rec letters. And these are examples that we walk through in the podcast with Chris Liu. So check it out. I hope that you'll find that useful. A lot of students are, writing about mental health challenges. The podcast, the first episode is with Chris. The next one is with an admission officer. And then the third one is with a student who wrote about mental health challenges and different takes, but, sharing similar things. And sort of this is the synthesis of those podcasts. So if you don't have time to listen to 3 hours of content, you can read it there. All right. How do we help students pick an idea? And how do we help students clarify an idea? Two sets of, I don't know, Lego. I guess they're sort of like Lego sets. First is the jellyfish exercise. Some of you are familiar with this one. It involves asking a student to pick something that they maybe love or know a lot about. So let's say a student's like, I really want to know about research. Okay, well, what do you want to say about it? Just connect it to as many values as you can in 2 minutes. And if a student can connect it in 2 or 3 minutes to like a bunch of different values, then great. Maybe that's potential content for an essay. Great. Now write me a paragraph on how research has taught you each of these things and make it chronological. When did your first research experience? And maybe, a couple, maybe use a couple different values in one paragraph and then a couple different values in the next one. And that should get them pretty well to a draft. But sometimes students aren't able to find a bunch of different values. So I would say if they can't, then you can just say, all right, let's pick a different something and see how many things you can connect it to. But it's a great simple topic test for elasticity. Up next is the log line exercise. So this is like, how do you help a student clarify their idea? Ask them to, in a sentence or two, describe what their story is or what story they want to tell in their essay. So here's an example from a movie. Tell me, whoever can name the movie first gets 10 points. After my family moved cross country, I felt lost and emotionally overwhelmed. That's the challenge, which made it hard to connect with others and left me bottling up my feelings. That's the effects. With help from unexpected sources, my own emotions, I learned how to embrace sadness, express vulnerability, and let go what I did. I discovered, somebody said it, that healing comes not just from joy, but from feeling it all, what I learned. Somebody get it? It's not quite Mean Girls. It's something else. Does anybody else? There we go. Elizabeth's laughing. Now, by the way, here's a fun fact, a transparent use of AI. I plugged in the logline concept and I was like, give me an example from a Pixar movie using this structure. So I used the structure that I normally use for this with essays, and it gave me this, and it's so good. It's so well written, but I wanted to just be like, hey, by the way, AI wrote this. I love that it says I learned how to embrace sadness because sadness is a character in the film, and healing comes not just from Joy, who's another character in the film. So just pointing out the cleverness of AI here. But here are two examples from students that AI did not write. So my time in America, living with 5 families, helped me develop different values: open-mindedness, connection, empathy, discipline, and gratitude. So what they're doing there is they're basically saying what the topic is about living with 5 families, and then just naming the values. And if I could get a student to do just that, that's a big win. And I think this is a good exercise to do either at the beginning of the process or even in the middle when they're in that drafting phase and they're like, I'm not sure what this essay is about. If you just have them write a short version of what's the log line, and this is the format for montage, name the topic and then name the values you want to show. And then if they're writing about challenges, name the challenge, what I did, and what I learned. So here, my experience supporting a hunger strike in my native land and watching my fellow students slowly lose interest in the strike. So this is the challenge. And my protest taught me to be passionate about social justice and inspired the creation of my own ethical clothing company. So challenge, there was this hunger strike. My friends lost interest in it and the protest. What did I do about it? I started this own ethical clothing company. What I learned, I became passionate about social justice. The student flips the what I learned and what they did, which is fine. But really, we see like the 3 parts of the essay. These are the 3 pieces. And if we were to imagine this being 6 paragraphs, we could imagine 2 paragraphs on the challenge and the effects, 2 paragraphs on what they learned or the turning point, and then 2 paragraphs on what they did about it. So the log lines kind of neatly turn into structure. For the 5 families essay, well, from each family, just give me a different value that you gained, which is what that student did. Okay. Sampler platter. This is, I don't know. Now I'm giving another, this is totally sample platter. Or like, here's another Lego that you can use. So when it comes to helping students get feedback on their first draft, these are four questions that they can ask, or you can ask them. Actually, you can ask them to ask themselves if they're writing a montage, which is to say, a non-challenges based essay. First of all, well, I'm going to relate these as though you're coming to an essay. Ask yourself, is it clear what the topic is? Do I even know among the many hundred topics or thousand or whatever, million topics in the world, what this essay is about? And is it clear, hopefully in the first quarter of the essay? I would say that's probably a good place. If I get to the fourth paragraph and I still don't know what the topic is, I'm getting a little impatient. I'm also distracted because I'm like, what is this essay about? And it's hard for me to enjoy it. So I would encourage students to clarify their topic. Second, to ask are the examples specific and are they visual? I use this kind of ambiguous term strong. What I mean by strong examples are when the student thinks about the value they want to show, like collaboration, is the example of collaboration clearly collaboration? And is it like 10 out of 10? Like, oh, yes, this is obviously collaboration. Or is it like kind of clear? And usually, the more specific and the more visual they are, the more that it sort of brings to life that example of whatever quality they're trying to show. Next, is it clear what the values are that they're trying to show in each paragraph? When I read the paragraph, if I'm an admission reader, and even if I'm reading quickly, am I able to go, ooh, this student really values whatever it is, collaboration. And then I love to see so what moments, moments of insight. Do we have a couple of those moments that surprise me, that reveals something that isn't obvious from elsewhere in the application? Having said all that, if a student, and by the way, I'm going to share these slides out with you all so you'll have these links. The CYOA tool is part of the Choose Your Own Adventure, or is part of the CEG Live, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. But just so you can, so feel free to screenshot these. We're also going to share the recording out. You can screenshot these. The questions that I ask when it comes to the narrative, actually, let me just, for ease, let me just put these in the chat in case you're like, what were those four questions he was talking about? Here we go. All right. Is it clear what the challenges are? And are they compelling? Because it could be that the challenges are clear, but we're like, so you got to see in physics. Put in the additional info. And is it clear what the effects are? Because sometimes students talk about the challenges, but we don't know what impact your parents divorce had on you. Give us some sense of that effect, what they did, and then what they learned from the experience. I think we need all those elements in order for a challenges-based essay to really work. And that's it. That's a short version of like four questions that you can have students ask on a first draft. Okay, pulling it together. So when do I recommend sort of working on this stuff? And I'm happy to talk a little bit about formats in just a minute too. But I'm a huge fan of that late May, right after APs, early June, doing that first brainstorming. And then if you've got time to catch them before they go away for the summer, to do what I call topic check speed sessions. And these are those sessions that are with you or with you and other counselors or English teachers to help test for, is this an elastic uncommon topic? And these can be done in 15 minutes or so. I love these these sessions. They tend to be really productive. The other thing you can do is you can do these in a group setting. So if you're in a large group of students, you can, if you want, have them share them. Let's say you're doing it virtually. What I'll do virtually is I will share these diagrams. I'll be like, hey, we're looking for something more uncommon elastic. And I do the brainstorming exercises. And then I have them actually do a log line. And we play a game called Is This a Good Topic or Not? And they'll actually share their log lines in the chat. And I'm like, yes, great. Yes, great. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to install a little shoulder, Ethan, so that as they're going through this work, they're able to like sort of imagine, well, what would college essay guy say? And that's the whole purpose of my workshops, whether it's a week-long one or a month-long one. I'm trying to get them to sort of think like a counselor, think like a college essay guy. And a way to do that is to give them some of these tools. So if you wanted to do topic checks in a group setting, I think it's a great thing, great possible thing to do, especially if you're working, solo in your office. And then once they've got some topics, spending July and August writing that personal statement. That's what the summer is for, I think. And, that way, August 1st, when that Common App opens up and they've got the supplemental essays that they plug in there, then they use something called our essay tracker, which if we could share that in the chat, that would be so lovely. I actually need to link to it in the presentation. I hope to remember to do that. But the essay tracker, you'll find it. Just Google essay tracker college essay guy. And they've got, there are tons of like prompts that they'll put in there and think about what goes where. And then I think, after that, August, September is time for supplemental essays, especially on those early schools. So that ideally October 1st, October 15th, we're finalizing those apps before, in many cases, they'll be submitted, the early ones, or early action, early decision in November. And then November, December, I don't want to tell students to like wait until you hear from your early school. Let's go ahead and work on those other applications so that, when you hear back from your other schools, you're able to like submit if you don't get in. And that's probably sort of the general timeline that I'm guessing many of y'all use. Um, so yeah, essay tracker coming through in the chat. But in terms of like calendaring this, one of the things I'd recommend is just creating a simple calendar plan with your team. There's a little link to how to do this, how to create a new calendar. You can Google this too. But just making sure everybody's on the same page and it's a shared calendar is, I think, a great idea. But one of the things we did at CEG, we kind of took it to the next level and we created a little calendar that if you kind of click through this, you can see like upcoming events and we've color coded them, red for counselors, blue for parents, and green for students, so that folks can, sign up for stuff. But you can also, here, I'll link this in the chat. You can also just, with the click of two buttons, you can add this to your Google Calendar. So boom, add, and all the events will pop up in your Google Calendar. So it takes a little bit more work, but it's something that you could potentially consider doing. But you can kind of see ours there. Um, yeah, maybe at some point we'll put a tutorial on how to do that because I think you can probably Google it, but how to do the feature where you just click one button and have people have it upload. I'm sure ChatGPT could help you with that as well. Okay, so how does this map out in different formats? So I love either a 3-day format, which is like either 3 consecutive days, or map it out over a week. Like a CEG Live, which I'll explain in a few minutes, or 4 weeks, which is what I do when I do my summer courses, which is like, 1 week in between. And then 8 weeks is great if you've got that much time, if you've got access to them over the summer and they can keep coming in. I've also seen 8 week format work really well during the fall. So students maybe they do, I don't know, other things during the summer. And in the fall, you just have like an open office hours time where students can just come in after school. And for an hour and a half, they just come in and they work on their essays, or maybe an hour. And I found that to be pretty productive too. You meet in a computer lab and they come and you can kind of just bop around. In some cases you can get volunteers to come in. I worked at volunteered at a charter school, and we had a couple volunteers that would just come in for 8 weeks and just meet with students. And that was really great. I mean, once they sort of had used some of these exercises, they just needed to like be somewhere where they could like get the work done. So I found that to be really useful. Inside the tool, let me just show you where this is. Um, I've got a little map about how to use this choose your own adventure stuff, like this tool as a curriculum. And I'm just going to flag it right here for future reference. But it's got like which modules to use on which days and how to structure things like that. The reason I'm not getting so in depth into this or being prescriptive about this is that I think that broadly speaking, even every school is so different. But broadly speaking, when you're trying to structure what you're doing, I would use like a 3-step format where you're doing brainstorming one day, outlining and writing another day, and then revising on the third day. And there are so many different ways to do that. But if you have a fourth day, you could do refining. But if you're working with students on, for example, a 3-day thing, you're probably not going to get into refining. You're probably just going to still be into the revising section. Um, but yeah, that's broadly speaking. I'm happy to answer specific questions about this and just throw them into the chat. We'll cover them during Q&A here. Um, okay, for those of you who have been listening to all this and you're like, I'm DIY, but this sounds like a lot, Ethan, and it feels like maybe I could use some help. Let me bend your ear for a few minutes and tell you about CEG Live. These are our boot camps that are free for students and they are low cost for high schools. And they're basically 3 boot camps that we lead. It's actually more than 3 because we do 2 personal statement ones. One in early June, one in mid-June for the personal statement. And then we do one on the college app and supplemental essays. And then for students who are applying to the UCs, we do those. So just to walk you through it real quick. And I want to start, I don't normally do this, but I want to start with price because it's actually good to know that what the price is. So I'm just going to scroll down to the price and then I'm going to tell you all about it. So the price for this is $497 for schools and organizations. But if you're a qualifying school with high financial need, it's $0. And what do I mean by that? So if you're on this call and your school is Title I if 40% or more of your students qualify for free or reduced lunch, if you're a CBO or you have a budget of $2,000 or less to support ongoing PD for your counseling staff, or if you're part of Avid, it's $0. So I wanted to like start with that so that folks, some people are like, oh, okay, this maybe maybe this could be cool. So broadly speaking, first of all, for the first 100 folks who sign up, we're going to do a special two-part PD series on writing effective letters of rec and demystifying college admissions with Tom and Hannah. Pretty lovely. Actually, Tom's going to do both of those. We set you up with like the promotional flyers, so you can like click here and it'll give you the flyers that you can use to promote it. So we make that easy, hopefully. And then, like I said, we've got two different sessions. We're leading one at 10 a.m. Pacific. This is again, so for some it'll be during the school year, for some it'll be during the summer. We wanted to do one at the end of the year because some people really prefer that because they want to be able to like tell their students about it and have them actually do it. But we've got one at 10 a.m. Pacific and one at 4 p.m. Pacific. So there's like an evening option for East Coast folks. And like I mentioned, it's brainstorming, outlining, and writing. Just to give you a sense of what I cover, on day one, we do brainstorming. So we spend an hour and a half. I take them through all the exercises, and then I show them broadly how to create a simple outline. So for instance, I walk them through the I love, I know method. And I show them like a sample essays. We've got like analysis of the essays. And then students basically here's a mini exercise to get you started. So at the end of day one, which is on a Monday, they've got a few different ideas, hopefully, and then they go and create outlines. And then day two, this is Wednesday, they come in and we talk about outlining. How do you create an awesome outline? And I've got different template charts. So this is here where students can basically map out. And I do a few different kinds of templates. So one is this one that you're looking at right here. Another one is just some students will just take the jellyfish exercise and they'll be like, yo, this is my outline right here. And it's like, okay, go for it if you feel like that could work for you. But then I get really specific about how to thicken the outline and bring in details to bring it to life. And they write a first draft. And then they get feedback on their first draft. And if you're doing this with your students, what'll happen is you'll start to get a bunch of emails that say, hi, Miss So-and-so. Here's my first draft of the personal statement. I'd love to know. And they'll ask you these 4 questions. And what I've tried to do is make it really simple for counselors to be able to be like, yes, it's clear what your topic is. No, the examples aren't clear yet. I think X could help. Is it clear what values? I'm clear on the values in the first paragraph, but not so much in paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. Did I spot 2 or 3 moments of insight? Not yet. Check out the College Essay Guys module on insights so that you read the essay in 3 minutes, you give them notes in 5 minutes, and hopefully it's speeding up the process. First of all, students are coming in hopefully with better ideas. And then second, it's speeding up the process. You're able to give them feedback. And then there are all sorts of stuff in here on revising that, for example, here's that module on insight that I mentioned. Or if a student's like, oh, my essay is really not flowing. How do I make it flow better? Well, here are 9 different ways to help your essay flow, like how to make it transition. And then finally here, I've got some ways to end a personal statement and some tips on polishing and grammar. And essentially, I've got some, check out the Hemingway editor, or you can check out Grammarly because colleges are okay with Grammarly. Um, so anyway, that's the sort of like, and then day 3, we're talking about revising. And we're gonna do some cool follow-up sessions with students where I've got a couple of my coaches are gonna come in and like give students live feedback and stuff. And by the way, we always are like, check with your counselor to make sure that this feels right and true uh, and that you're feeling good on this. So in other words, we always sort of defer. We're never putting ourselves in the position of like, well, we think this, no matter what your counselor says. No, it's like sometimes a student will be like, should I write about such and such or such and such? And I'm like, well, I think such and such could be more elastic, but I don't know, talk to your counselor. So, all right, Q&A and a CEG Live giveaway. Pop quiz. Who is the author of the book that I'm reading on AI and education? Winner gets free entrance to CEG Live. Lindsay, you are the winner. Congrats. If you'll email help@collegeessayguy.com, then I'm hoping you're a school counselor, but assuming you are, you and all of your students will get access to CEG Live. But for the rest of you, you can still get access to CEG Live at the link that we shared. So speedy. Yeah. And you spelled it correctly and everything. All right. We're in Q&A time. So let's get into it. What questions do you have about creating, essentially creating these programs for students, mapping any of this stuff out. I realized that I was kind of short on tying it all together. And again, I sort of have this challenge of like, it's hard for me to be like, here's how because every counselor has a different set of hours. But I'm happy to talk through a couple different formats. If you want to just be like, here's how much time I have, Ethan, what would you do? Or maybe you even have something mapped out, a broad plan, throw that into the chat and I can give you some ideas. What do you got? Yeah. Elizabeth's asking, what about students with learning differences or specifically affecting attention? Sometimes with students with learning differences, I find it useful to do the exercises with them. Sometimes I've found that if I just sort of go like, hey, do these exercises and like talk to me in a week. If students have, for instance, executive functioning difficulties, then, a week later, they tried, but they're like, oh, I wasn't able to get to it, in some cases. So just sitting with them. And I find that this can be really awesome in like a group setting. And just going through these exercises one by one can actually be really fun. And in some cases, really connective because you're sort of like, sitting with them. And in some cases, I'll actually do the exercises with them, which is kind of fun. And walking them through, for instance, on the brainstorming. With some of the the later parts where like we're outlining or talking to students about how to write a draft, I find that oftentimes if we can get a little bit more specific in the outline and they can have, so if we can set them up with sort of like big picture and application log line, so they know what parts of themselves are scoping, they're putting in the application. And then in terms of as you mentioned, the scaffolding, knowing kind of what's going to go in the paragraphs gives them, I think, a lot to do, a lot to focus on, and it sort of can sometimes keep them from sort of like and this is for really any student, but the terror of the blank page. I don't tend to have too many students who get like writer's block, for instance, or who like don't know what's next, because I'll oftentimes help them with a lot of specifics on the outlining portion. I didn't really, because for the sake of time, have a lot of time to get into that. But if a student can write a really meaty outline, I'll give you an example of one here. Um, Let me just go into the tool real quick. The tool is basically, Calvin, my head of coaches, describes it as Ethan's brain on essays. And it is totally that. So, here's an example of, let me go to the outlining section because we're talking about outlining. So what I tell students for the opening is just write a simple, clear opening. So it doesn't even need to be like fancy. You just need to like name the topic, bracelets or stickers or bookshelves or whatever it is. This is the essence objects. That's why all of those are like tangible things. And then I tell them to bring the examples to life. So for instance, if you want to talk about art and design and experimentation, what's in this case, sticker that represents that? And for each one of these, write a sentence on how this sticker represents these qualities. And so if the student can write a sentence for each of their examples that shows the values, that's going to really get them started. And they might need help with a couple of them, like a couple of the examples, but then you do one with them and you go, do you kind of see what we're doing here? And it's like, yeah, okay. Do you think you could do that again? Yeah, okay. And oftentimes that kind of gets them off to a good start. By do one with them, what I mean is like, okay, well, you've got this We Heart Design sticker. What values does that represent for you? And they might name them. Okay. Well, when you do your design work, like what is, tell me about that. And, they're talking and maybe you're typing or something like that. And I love to do this again in a group setting as well, because just watching a student sort of think through this and you can watch the outline sort of materialize. Other students see them and they're like, oh, I can kind of see how some of these essays are built. So doing it like what I call like a live demo can be really powerful, I think, for students and get them to come up with questions on the spot that would otherwise come up later on. How useful do I find peer brainstorming and editing for each other? I like a use and interview your peer method. I love it. I love it. I really do. Um, Peer brainstorming. I mean, for example, if I had an hour and a half with students, I would probably have them do all of the exercises that I mentioned to you. And then, all right, let's turn to a partner. And I want you to share what are three of the roles that you highlighted and how do they manifest in your life? Because what's going to happen is they're going to turn to somebody else. They're going to hear them share and they're going to be like, ooh, that just gave me an idea. And they're going to write more stuff down. Or their friend is going to be like, you also are, a creator in these other ways. And they're going to be like, oh, cool. And they're going to write it down. So it's going to have them. feeling heard. It's going to, in some cases, build energy momentum. And some students are going to find their topic in just that 5 minute conversation, and they're going to get some ideas. So I love it. Interview your peer method also is a great. I'd love to see the questions that you use if you feel compelled, if you feel willing to share them. And then when it comes to editing, I think editing can be most helpful if students are given parameters. So what I mean by that is like if you just turn a student loose and say, just give each other feedback on your essays, it could go well, but it could be, not so well. Or students will kind of narrowly focus on like grammar. So a thing to do is to potentially zoom back and tell them, okay, here's what we're looking for. And one thing you can do is potentially give them those four questions that I shared. If the student's writing about non-challenges, here are some good questions to ask. If they're writing about challenges, here are some other good questions to ask. And and you can also model this live for them. So one thing you can do is say, okay, we're gonna break into pairs in a little bit, but first I want to show you how to listen to each other. So does somebody have an idea? You basically model how to be a great feedback giver. And if you want to use the scaffolding of the four questions that I shared, that's a great thing to do. So in that situation, the student would potentially, come to the front of the class or visually, if you're online, come to the front of the class and you have to ask permission. Hey, could I read your essay aloud? And then you read the essay aloud, and then you ask the student the four questions and have them answer them first, and then go, okay, here's my take, and you answer the four questions. And that could be a simple way to do that. And then you turn to the group and say, that's what we're doing. So you'll do that for maybe 10 minutes each, and 10 minutes, and then you switch partners. If your school has 33% Title I students, I mean, we're cool, Natasha. We're pretty generous with these things. So write in. We'd love to have you join, is my short answer. And it also sort of depends on your budget. Like if you're like, Ethan, we really don't have budget, then I'm just like, come on, join. We just didn't want to, we also want to just, for folks to really be bought in. So my main thing, Natasha, would be like, get your students to show up and that takes a little work from the counselor, because if you just send them an email and be like, we're doing the college essay guy, like, yeah, things students could show up, but if folks, if you kind of like say, hey, we're doing this, no, we're really doing this, that's what I mean, that's worth it to me. So I guess what I'm saying is you're cool, we'll get you in here, Natasha, but make sure the students show up, stay on them about it. What else? We got a few minutes here before I have to go up for dinner with my girls. Any other things on your mind and hearts, even as it relates to college essays, applications, admission writ large? We can zoom back here and get a little bigger picture if you want. What else are you thinking about? Or what else are you curious about in college essay guy land? We can again broaden it. I'll tell you, I just recorded two new podcast episodes. One of them is coming out on Tuesday with Angel Perez. That's fun. We're talking about leadership in uncertain times. And then I've got another one that I recorded on AI and college admission, and that's coming out in probably 2 weeks, 2 weeks and 5 days. We try to release them every 2 weeks-ish. And we're writing a whole bunch of new content. A lot of it's for the course that I'm teaching right now with counselors. There's also, fun fact, I'm doing an advanced counselor retreat, and we have uh, like scholarship spots available for this. But since you're here, let me just and you're the kind of people who stay late for webinars. Let me just throw you that. So yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. There's a little, let me just do a quick moment on this. I'm doing an advanced retreat. It's in person. It's going to be in 3 months in Southern California. And we've got a couple scholarship spots. We've got what we call steward spots. These are folks who are going to pay to attend, but it's going to be kind of a dig deep, get in with each other, write our own personal statements. We did one of these in 2019 and it went pretty well. So we're doing it again. So just a quick plug for that. Let's see. Yeah, Devin, just email I forget exactly how the policies work, but just email. I mean, I know you, and just email with the context, and I think that should be fine. I think just sort of just describe the situation. Oh yeah, thanks, Rebecca, putting in the feedback form. Appreciate that. Cool. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so I think meetings should be as long as they should be. And so let's call it there for today. And thanks for being here and being in connection and community. And hi all the way to Bangkok. That's awesome. And I hope this was useful. So I hope to see some of you signing up for CEG Live. Would love to support your students. If you've got any questions about it, you can email us. But yeah, thanks, and I'll see you around.